around the world, ensuring that science is delivered to a patient wherever he is living. And I think to answer these questions, science needs to lead us there. And we have already learned a lot from science when we think about breast cancer. So the first thing I think it's important to consider is that many times we talk about breast cancer, but breast cancer is in fact not only a disease, right? 6 different subtypes. But in our clinical practice, we still use the immunohistochemistry characterization to drive our decision and our treatments. So if we look at this pie table, basically what we see is that we have a big percentage of breast cancer patients presenting with what we call HR positive, HER2 negative disease. And this means that these tumors express hormone receptors, and they don't express another different receptor that is frequent in breast cancer, which is the HER2 receptor. And this accounts for around 60% of all breast cancer cases. So we have another, let me show you, another subtype here that we call the triple negative breast cancer. And basically it is called like that because in these cases, tumors don't express neither of these 3 receptors. So they don't express estrogen receptor, they don't express progesterone receptor, and they don't express HER2 receptor. And then here in blue, we have another entity that we call HER2 positive disease, and because of how the name of it explains, it is characterized by expression of HER2. And why is this characterization so important? Because we know that the breast cancer subtype that we're talking about had implications both from a prognostic perspective, meaning that different subtypes have different outcomes, different survival rates, different natural histories, but also from a predictive standpoint, as they basically allow us to understand what would be the best treatment for this patient. And actually, we talk a lot about precision care, and sometimes we think of precision care as something of the future or of the present, very recent present. But in fact, I think breast cancer is where precision medicine began. And if we think about, for example, the HR positive setting that I just mentioned, we have known this for decades now, and in fact we have been using hormone therapy to treat this specific breast cancer subtype since the 70s. So it is a really good example how we use the biology of a certain tumor cell to develop specific treatments that target those characteristics of those tumor cells to select the best patient to benefit from those treatments and to improve outcomes for those patients. More recently, HER2 positive breast cancer subtype is another very good example of how we are using the characteristic of these tumor cells to indeed advance and improve outcomes for this patient. And I would like to dive a bit more into this tumor type. Because we know that HER2 positive disease was actually associated with poor prognosis and worse outcomes. And we know this from a clinical perspective and clinical data. So if we look at these survival curves that are from an era before specific treatments were developed for this specific breast cancer subtype, we can see that this lower curve means in patients that presented with this specific subtype, so the HER2 positive breast cancer subtype, had a lower probability of survival. So the lower the curve, the lower the probability of survival, the higher the curve, the higher probability of survival. So we can see that these patients did really poorly. And this was true for, advanced disease, but also for early disease that was submitted to surgery. Here on the right panel, you can see again that the lower curve, so the lower probability of having a long relapse-free survival it was associated with this subtype that I just mentioned, the HER2 positive breast cancer subtype. And not only we have this data from these worse survival probabilities, but also we have learned that actually the sites of the metastasis, so the organs to where cancer cells go and develop into metastatic lesions were quite different between the different breast cancer subtypes. And we can see here, for example, that actually HER2 positive subtype is associated with a higher frequency of brain metastases, which is, of course, also associated with worse outcomes. But also we can see here with liver disease, with lung disease. So we understand that actually this specific breast cancer subtype had a worse prognosis and worse disease outcomes associated. So there was clearly a need to improve outcomes for these patients. And again, where do we start? We start with science. We start by understanding better the biology of these tumor cells. This is, I would say, a more complex slide, and I'm not going to take you through it. But I just wanted to give you a brief overview just to show how it's important actually to understand very well the biology of the cancer cell. So take this yellow figure as the example of the HER2 receptor, or the HER family actually. And you see that this receptor has an extracellular domain, a transmembrane domain, and then intracellular domain. And these receptors that are actually overexpressed in breast cancer, you can have almost a 100-fold increase of number of receptors, achieving, just imagine, 2 million receptors of these per cell, which is really a huge increase. And this activation of these receptors is associated with different pathways that increase cell proliferation, cell survival, cell evolution. So you can see that, the overexpression of this receptor, the activation of this receptor, is then causing the cells to be more active, to proliferate more, and then basically to induce the outcomes that I've just shown you from a clinical perspective. So understanding exactly how these receptors, these HER2 receptors, work, where they were positioning, how they were overexpressed, how they were activated, allow us to then develop specific treatment options that basically would work on these receptors. And we have different examples. We have the monoclonal antibodies that basically linked to the receptor and induced cell death, or induced didn't allow the dimerization of this receptor, meaning didn't allow the activation of this receptor, and therefore didn't allow the activation of these pathways, and didn't allow the cell to proliferate and to survive. Then more recently, we move on to another specific way of targeting these cells that we call the antibody-drug conjugates. And this is also very interesting because this can be seen as a Trojan horse, meaning that actually we are using this receptor as a way, as an entrance door to deliver very effective chemo and cytotoxic drugs into this specific cell, meaning that we are able to deliver very potent cytotoxic drug to specific tumor cells, avoiding also the adverse events that we can see from this chemo. So this was an evolution of our understanding of the tumor cell, and again taking advantage of something that the cancer cell has evolved to be in its advantage, but taking advantage of that to improve patient outcome. And then we are already moving on to other different treatment options, such as bispecific antibodies or vaccines that basically take into consideration the effect of the immune system that we know already that is very, very cancer progression. So, using all this biology knowledge, we were able then to develop different treatment options as pharma companies, as medical and scientific communities. And we can see from, before year 2000, the first anti-HER2 treatment that was approved was trastuzumab, a monoclonal antibody, and we can see that through time we were able to continue developing these different treatment strategies, again, using different options in the biology of the cancer cell to target these very specific HER2 positive cells to then improve outcomes for patients. And more recently, as I mentioned, we brought into clinic trastuzumab deruxtecan, an example of this antibody-drug conjugate that I just mentioned, and that indeed has been able to continue improving the outcomes for cancer patients, in specific for breast cancer patients. So this is a very nice graph from a study in the references, that basically what it shows is the survival curves of HER2 positive patients according to year of diagnosis. And you can see that, the lower curve here, as I mentioned before, that is associated with a lower probability of survival, so associated with really worse outcomes, have throughout the years really improved. So I think once again, this is a great example of how we are using, precision medicine, how we are using a better knowledge of cancer biology, how we are using an overexpression of a specific receptor that cancer cells use to proliferate more, to be more activated in our favor, and to be able to develop very effective treatment options that really allows us to improve and bring this survival curve towards, the best outcomes we can for our patients. But we're not stopping here. And this is the survival curves from Destiny Breast 03 study, so a more recent study in this setting, comparing the use of trastuzumab deruxtecan, so an ADC, an antibody-drug conjugate, as I mentioned before. And you can see that once again, we are improving the survival curves, and we are showing that we should not settle for less. I think, for me, this evolution of HER2 positive breast cancer metastatic disease is also a reminder that we should not be comfortable where we get sometimes. And I think because HER2 positive disease was associated with such bad outcomes, at a certain point, I think we as the medical community got so excited of what we had already achieved for our patients that we were comfortable with it. And I think when we saw these survival curves, I think everyone it was really a reminder, we should not settle for less, and we should strive to continue improving outcomes for breast cancer patients, and to ensure that these improvements and that this innovation can indeed reach all patients that can benefit from this innovation wherever they are in the world. So I would pause here, and I welcome any questions during our panel discussion. Thank you so much for hearing me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Guys, get this sponsor video ready. If you've got any questions, there's a WhatsApp number for the questions. Can you reflect it on the screen? So you can either send a message to that WhatsApp number, or there are mics on each of the passages here, and we'll just assist you to make sure that you can pose your question. So yeah, we're talking about breast cancer, the most common cancer amongst females worldwide. It's no different here in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa. The lifetime risk here is 1 in 27, and we must also remember that men also do get breast cancer. although the prevalence is much smaller, 1 to 3% of all breast cases. And one thing about this presentation, one of the values of AstraZeneca is follow the science. And what she has just shown us, a bit technical, but it's showing us that by following science, you can have innovation. And what's important then is that when something comes out of that innovation, we need to improve access to those newer kind of drugs. We all remember, that not long ago, as Sub-Saharan Africa, things took a little longer to get here. And so we talk innovation and how innovation should be brought closer to the people so that more people can actually benefit from that. The rest of the world, 5-year survival for ECA breast is somewhere around 80%, all right, in like the much more developed nations. But when you look here, a lot of people, they present late, and therefore a lot of people die, and that could have been at least, either prevented or at least the lives prolonged. So, do you have any questions that have come through to the WhatsApp group? All right. If there's anyone in the room who would like to pose a question to Dr. Rosario, okay. There's a mic here.
Good morning, hopefully.
Oh, she's supposed to be you, so it's okay.
Good morning, hopefully you can hear me, Chris in Manchester. Fascinating science and data. I've got only one question, and that is we know in cancer care, supportive care, nutrition and microbiome plays a critical part. And I just wanted to know, have you looked at Africa-specific patients just to put the context to that? Or if not, is there a plan to actually do specifically look, because they may influence actually our outcomes that will be really important for us to know.
Right.
Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, can you still hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah,
we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, perfect. So thank you so much for the question, and you're totally right. I think, more and more we know that the importance of not only the cancer cell, but also the host characteristics, and I think microbiome is a fascinating area that we're starting to understand more and more. There are some data specifically on breast cancer that shows differences, not only in outcomes with different microbiome, but also differences on treatment response with different microbiomes, and how can we also modulate that to improve response. We are also looking at it from an AstraZeneca perspective, and there are different groups worldwide also. So I'm sure we'll have more answers in how we can also, modulate these host, let's call it like that, these host characteristics. We started with the example of the immune system. Sometimes we take it for granted that we have shown how we can modulate the immune system to also improve outcomes for patients, but that was not that long ago. So we started with that, showing the importance of the rest of the host on cancer progression, and I'm sure microbiome will follow lead there. And again, yes, we are exploring that area as well, not only us, but different groups around the world.
Can you increase your screen?
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that question. Are there any other questions from the floor? Are there any pathologists in the room? I'm not pick on someone. I think we've heard from the clinicians, just the demographics.
Let me ask a question in the meantime.
Yeah.
Dr. Rosario?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, so you were presenting about the people who are testing positive for HER2, but an average person, how many people are even aware, that there's a risk factor, relating to, the cancer of the breast? Some people may know Angelina Jolie as one of the people who, because their mother died from breast cancer, she went and checked and found that she was HER2 positive, and she went and removed her breast, what they call radical mastectomy. So, but how common is that? You know, how many people, where you are in Europe, who are actually aware of that risk?
I hope I could follow your question, because I had some problems with the sound. I guess you're referring to the diagnostic part, right? And that can be characterized.
The screening part, and then the diagnostic part.
Right, the screening part and then the diagnostic part. And again, I think, breast cancer is also a very good example of the importance of screening programs and ensuring that we have, an early diagnosis as possible. So again, we have been able to show the impact of screening on the outcomes of patients. There are differences still today on screening around the world. And even in Europe, that's the region I know better. Even in Europe, we have those differences, and those differences really account for the outcomes of these patients. So this is an area where we need to improve, and we also understand, I think another topic related to screening of breast cancer in nowadays, and also, again, a lesson to all of us, is that we need to adapt how we see screening as we evolve, again, our knowledge about the disease. And for example, in breast cancer, we are seeing differences in epidemiology, for example, regarding the age of diagnosis. So we are seeing more and more younger patients being diagnosed with breast cancer. So we need to rethink, our age, for example, criteria for screening in breast cancer. I think, and we'll have a talk on that, I think also what we need to think about is with the evolution and technology, how can we also use technology to improve screening for breast cancer. And there are also some programs, some research on that field. Again, we have, when we talk about diagnosis, again, I totally agree with you. We need to ensure that we can characterize breast cancer in the best possible way, and this does not always happen, not only in terms of the scope of the characterization that we've just shown, but also in terms of the timing of that characterization. And for example, we have a European cancer plan that was just issued recently, where it clearly states the importance of ensuring, the right timing of diagnosis and the right characterization of the disease for these patients. So I totally agree with you. And when we talk about, improving outcomes, of course we talk about also the innovation that we bring to improve those outcomes. But there's also different steps of the patient journey that we can improve to ensure these improved outcomes for all patients. And for sure, screening and diagnosis are part of that patient journey.
Yeah. And Dr. Rosario, what are the trends that you're seeing now, I guess, with the new innovations? You spoke about age at diagnosis, but stage at diagnosis, are you seeing any differences there? And then maybe while you're on that, any challenges in terms of access to funding for treatment?
Sorry, I lost you for some seconds there. Any challenge on?
With regard to access to funding for treatment.
With regards to, sorry.
Funding for treatment?
Oh, funding for treatment, right? Yeah. So I'm sure we'll hear more on that on the next talk. But yes, I think here we need to understand again how can we work together not only to advance science and knowledge for breast cancer, but also to ensure that we bring true innovation that really impacts patient outcomes, and that we are able to fund it. So for sure we need to work together on that part as well. But I think Tilly will talk about that further.
Are there any questions that have come through the WhatsApp group? Okay, no questions. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Rosario. we're gonna call Mr. Tiwe, but before that, the sponsor video needs to be played at this point. Guys, and the sponsor is in the house, so we can't make that mistake. Universal health.
In a world where healthcare disparities persist, there shines a beacon of hope. Welcome to the Phakamisa Initiative by AstraZeneca, where the patients are at the heart of our mission.
Was on dominant diseases.
Yes.
And we were ignored in terms of NCDs.
And
but we see that because the ignorance was high from literacy, awareness perspective, that the volcano is going to erupt now.
Yes.
For over a decade, Phakamisa has been the cornerstone of healthcare access in South Africa.
I think there's a bit of bias. We need one for universal health. Phakamisa is going to have time to. Technology always makes life easy, but sometimes when it doesn't work so well, people start to question whether the problem is the technology or the people behind.
Is your wellness program doing enough to look after your organization's most valuable assets, your members and employees? At Universal Corporate Wellness, we're driven by a singular mission to transform lives and organizations through innovative wellness solutions. Our unique programs cover all aspects of well-being, from wellness day events and executive health assessments to 24/7 telephonic counseling and comprehensive employee wellness initiatives. With over a decade of experience, Universal Corporate Wellness is at the forefront of innovation. Our U-Wellness app revolutionizes well-being with a holistic approach across all 8 dimensions, making a significant impact on a multinational basis. Available as a standalone service to corporate clients or integrated into a medical scheme, our wellness program offerings are designed to meet the most diverse needs. Join the wellness revolution. Connect with Universal Corporate Wellness, where innovation meets wellness 24/7. Scan the QR code on screen or in your conference bag to contact us. Call, text or WhatsApp and let's meet.
Thank you very much. At least I can see a smile from the sponsor. He was starting to not smile anymore. So our next speaker is Tiwe, who's the VP, Vice President of International Oncology and Market Access at AstraZeneca. All right? His role, this is a role he has served since May 2020. All right, so just a few months after COVID-19 started, he also got a job. So, when there's a pandemic, there could be opportunity, and that became an opportunity, for him. But prior to then, he had been a country president of AstraZeneca Singapore since January 2016. During his tenure as the CP of Singapore, he was the president of the Singapore Association of Pharmaceutical Industries and the chair of the European Chamber of Commerce, Eurotem Healthcare Committee. He's currently serving as a member of the Singapore Pharmacy Council, the National University of Singapore Pharmacy Program Advisory Board, and the NGEEN Polytechnic Life Sciences and Chemical Technology Advisory Committee. His 28-year career spans across pharmaceutical and FMCG industries, having worked in other MNCs like Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson. He's a Singapore national. He was educated and trained as a pharmacist. He holds an MBA from the National University of Singapore. Outside of Singapore, he has lived and worked in Thailand, in Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, And he stays active through tennis and mountain biking. And you can see, when he stands up, you see that his physique, there's a difference between me and him. All right, over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Fandi, for the very kind introduction. I had the opportunity to walk up Lion's Head Trail a few days ago, and my God, I don't think I'm as fit as I thought I was. So it was a tough walk, but very nice indeed, and it's such a pleasure to be here today. The topic of our breakaway session this morning is about value-based healthcare. And what Dr. Rosario has nicely set up for us is to show how scientific advances are really just changing the course of our drug development. We are able to target specific diseases of small group of patients, like what Dr. Rosario mentioned about the HER2 positive breast cancer. Because the mechanisms of actions that we're working on can act in very complex ways. And there are some drugs that we are working on that can potentially be curative. And one example in the hematological cancer is, for example, cell therapy, whereby a single dose can potentially cure patients. And as a consequence of that, it actually transforms patient pathways. Because how do you administer cell therapy versus what you do traditionally with chemotherapy is actually quite different. And then finally, with immuno-oncology, as an example, one drug or one medicine can serve multiple indications or multiple diseases. And we have also opportunities to combine multiple modalities, because immuno-oncology, what it does is it activates our own immune system to attack the cancer cell. But what Dr. Rosario mentioned is that antibody drug conjugate directly kill the cancer cells. There's nothing here to say that we can't combine the two, right? And for payers like yourself, when you combine different modalities, how do you actually attribute the different components and fund for it, right? So that is very exciting for science, but what it does is that, with the new treatments, it does bring a bit of complication for access to patients. So what are the complications that we can look at? One is it creates uncertainty, right? In clinical trials, we may demonstrate a particular efficacy, a particular outcome. Does that translate to real world, right? The second thing is around, it creates a complexity for payers, because how do you plan for your budget if there is uncertainty around how long the patient must be on the treatment for? What are the number of patients that are eligible for this treatment? And again, I go back to immuno-oncology, because it's beginning to treat different cancers and different stages of cancer as well. And then finally, if a drug or medicine is used for multiple indication or multiple treatments, how do you know how many patients is on a particular treatment or particular indications versus the next one? So that creates a little bit of uncertainty for payers. The other one is obviously budget impact, right? Because regardless of whether the payers are the patients, whether the payers are the public, the government, or the payers are private insurers or HMOs, there is a finite budget. So how do you account for the cost effectiveness of the drugs or the medicines that you are paying for? And increasingly, the higher priced medicines are being used more and more broadly because they are targeting multiple indications. And then I talked about the opportunity for combining the different drugs, so that has budget impact implications as well. And particularly for drugs that are used with short duration or single dose, so cell therapy is used as a single dose. There are other immuno-oncology medicines that can be used as a priming dose over a period of time, given that all of us work within budget cycles as well. So those are the things that we need to take into consideration. Hence, this is not a panacea, but hence, value-based agreements where what we try to do with value-based agreements is to come up with an agreement that enables patient access while reducing uncertainty for payers by linking access or reimbursement terms. Right? So that's the intent of value-based agreements. So value-based agreements are potential vehicles to enable more equitable access. And so what it can potentially do if it can enable timely patient access, so faster for patients to access the medicine, ability of the funding that payers need to give. And very often with these value-based agreements, it requires collection of a lot of data to generate real-world evidence. And with this real-world evidence, we can actually use it to optimize clinical practices as well. Right? So let's look at what are the different ways of structuring value-based agreements. So there are different types, and they are not mutually exclusive. You can combine one or more of these different mechanisms. Right? Let me start with the bottom left and talk about financial-based agreements. So financial-based agreement basically links the utilization of a medicine to reflect its value. So we are here not talking about just the direct discounts, right? So, yesterday and the day before, we talked a little bit about health technology assessment. So health technology assessment allows us to determine what the value of the innovation brings to patients, and we can model an agreement around that. Now, another type of financial-based agreement that can sit on top of health technology assessment is the risk assessment or risk-sharing agreements. So for example, we say that there are X number of patients that will use it for this particular period of time, and based on the health technology assessment, this is the cost. But at the same time, because of the budget considerations, we say, there are going to be X number of vials of this medicine used, but what if it exceeds? Then can we have a way of sharing the risk of, if we use, or the usage of that medicine is higher than we project, right? So those are potential way of structuring financial-based agreements. Outcome-based agreements is, as the term implies, based on the outcome, right? So as I mentioned earlier on, the clinical trial shows a particular outcome, right? For example, how long the patient will survive for. We can use that as a basis of structuring the agreement to say, based on this particular treatment, compared to what is currently the standard of care, you get this additional benefit or additional outcome, this is what the payer will pay for. That's one way of doing it. The other one is actually using real-world outcomes. So what is the patient actually experiencing? So we can actually measure the real outcome in real world, and the funders pay for the specific outcome. So again, there are different ways of structuring outcome-based agreements. The last one, is really service-based agreements. Are there services that surround the particular treatment that can be built into the agreement as well? So one example could be the administration support. So meaning, a drug, but infused in a particular way, can that be supported as part of the agreement? Diagnostics, right? If it's a precision medicine, right, for a particular subgroup of patients, can the diagnostics be built into the agreement as well? Right. So there are different ways of structuring service-based agreements. One other example could be monitoring of side effects, right? So certain drugs have very specific side effects, and there are technologies, app-based technologies, for example, that help monitor the patient. So can that also be built into part of the agreement? So there are different ways that we can structure this. And as I mentioned for a couple of times already, real-world evidence plays a very important part of implementing value-based agreements. Right? Because to support the implementation of value-based agreement, what we can do with data is we can track the usage of specific indications. Right? So for example, if you have multiple indications, how do you know how many patients are using a specific indication. So real-world evidence can help you track that. And over time, as you collect the data, right, because for one example is, if you start a value-based agreement, you can use projected numbers, but as you collect the real-world evidence, you know exactly what is the usage and what is the outcome. Using that data, we can then, redo the agreement based on what is actually happening on the ground versus a hypothetical situation that we are basing on at the beginning of the value-based agreement. So that's an example of how important real-world evidence is. Now, this chart is a little bit complicated, and value-based agreements can be achieved depending on the depth and complexity of the data infrastructure that we have. So let me walk you through this slide a little bit. On the x-axis is what is the clinical value of the indication, or what is the outcome of the particular indication. So you can either have the expected, so the expected value is based on the clinical trial. Right? So you know how long the patient is progression-free, how long the patient survives with that particular medicine. Or you can use actual data, what is realized, right? So what is happening on the ground itself. So that's the x-axis. On the y-axis is the funding consideration. Do you consider on the top the actual usage by indication? So let's say there are 2 indications. Do you track the usage of each indication? In the middle is estimated. We say that based on epidemiology, indication A is 60%, indication B is 40%. We just use that as an assumption. Or the third one at the bottom is you just don't consider. We just consider it on average. I mean, you don't consider the use by indication. So these are the different ways. So let me talk you through the top right-hand side to say, well, the holy grail, well, not holy grail, but the most sophisticated way of doing it is you based it on what is the outcome that is actually realized by the real-life patient, and you actually track the indication specifically, right? So this is a true outcome-based pricing, right? Now, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any country or any payer actually using this outcome-based, right? So using real data and tracking the indication by tracking the usage specifically by indication in real time. Right? So that's outcome-based pricing. I'm not aware of anybody doing that. Then let's look at the top left, where we use blended or indication-specific payments, right, based on actual usage. Right? So one example of a country that does that is actually Australia. Right? So Australia actually has indication-based pricing whereby they track the indication, the usage of indication by indication, but they don't use the realized data. They just use the clinical data to estimate the outcome. Right. So a true indication-based pricing example is Australia, whereby the government actually pays the pharma companies based on a specific indication. So the pricing of each indication is actually different depending on the health technology assessment. Right? So that's one example. The one in blue in the middle, and this is an example where the UK is actually using right now, and in Italy. So this is only done in the last couple of years, is not a true indication base, but we look at the benefit of each indication and the value that is derived from each indication, but then we do a weighted average pricing or blended price. So let's say, hypothetically, an indication A, let's say breast cancer, is judged to be $1,000 a month, for example, but indication B is judged to be $2,000 a month. And if you blend, and the population happens to be 50-50, so if you do a weighted average pricing, it's $1,500. So you just use the blended price to say, okay, this is $1,500, and this is what the payer will pay for, right? So that is actually a much simpler way whereby we can use, just basic mathematics to actually calculate what the price should be paid for. Right? So this is, different ways that we can structure value-based agreements. I apologize if this is a little bit complicated, right? But there are good case studies for each of this, and my personal preference is actually the blue part, whereby with the estimates, you can actually be able to come up with a value-based agreement relatively quickly, and then using real-world evidence, 2, 3, 4 years later, after the deed, or as part of the deed agreement, to reevaluate the actual usage. So that is a more practical way of doing it. Right? The way Australia is doing it, whereby they are tracking by indication, is a very good system. It's just that you need to have a very robust system to be able to track the actual usage by indication. So, coming to the end of the presentation, the journey to value-based agreement, it's not rocket science, it just requires collaboration. So we need to identify for each country what are the specific uncertainties and challenges. And then we need to define the common goals. What are we aiming for, right? Is it ensuring that there is good value for money, cost effectiveness? Is it budget impact? Usually it's a combination of both or more, right? And then collaborate with relevant stakeholders to align on the methodology. So that's it, right? So with that, the calls for action for AstraZeneca is really, how can we come together to enable better patient outcomes and sustainable healthcare through creative solutions that we can come up with through value-based agreements. Right. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll hand it over back to the chair of the session. Thank you.
All right. So, can you show the WhatsApp number there so that people can send the questions there? Otherwise, we've got the 2 mics, and my colleague, Dr. Wu, will actually pick up the questions and drive the question and answer. But maybe before that happens, the different countries that you guys are interacting with, is there an increasing appetite, to move towards these outcomes-based form of, contracting when it comes to pharma? And what benefits are there for the funders, and what benefits are there for the patients? Because ultimately, you said everything is around the patient. So as people are looking at going this way, is it benefiting the patient? Is it benefiting the funders?
Yeah, I think, so thanks for the question, and it's a great question, because at the end of the day, so the short answer is yes, there's more appetite for outcomes-based agreements, because at the end of the day, the payers want to pay for an outcome, right? Otherwise, it's just a cost. The question is, how do you actually structure an outcome-based agreement? So from a complexity point of view, if you want to pay for the actual outcome, we need to have robust data system to measure that, right? So most countries actually use expected outcomes, right? So based on the clinical studies as at least a starting point, right? And what we advocate is, very often, increasingly there's more appetite to say, okay, let's work on a value-based agreement based on the expected outcome. But as part of the agreement, can we come together to collect real-world data, right? And based on the real-world data, a couple of years down the road, let's look at the real-world data and then do another agreement based on the real-world data.
Thank you. You can take over. Thanks. So my colleague, Dr. Tebu Pale, he's the one who's driving the Q&A, so please make it work.
Any questions on the WhatsApps? On the WhatsApp chat? Just an indication. And whilst that, you've got it already.
Okay, yes.
Just use this one.
Not very full, unfortunately. So it says, how do we overcome the South African legal prohibitions on BPAS?
Okay.
BPAS.
All right, I'll give you context. So there's, some countries have pricing regulations. South Africa is one of them. So you have a single exit price system, you can't discount, so there's that rigidity and just on the pricing side, that makes it difficult to enter into, whether you're doing blended pricing or that kind of stuff. And the question is, how would you overcome? So in a country where there's no flexibility around pharmaceutical pricing, it's strictly regulated, what other options or alternatives do you have?
Got it. So, is the mic working? Yeah, okay, good. So, let me give two responses to that. Right? One is one example where this can work in such a system is Brazil. Right? So in Brazil, it is also largely, it's quite similar, a HMO-based system, but they have one body called the AMS that actually does the health technology assessment and agrees on the listing and the price. Right? Once that's done, and it's a semi-government organization, but once that's done, then all the HMOs actually reimburse the particular medicine at that price. So within the context, my understanding, of the limited understanding on the South Africa situation is that could potentially work. Now, having said that, I think, the legislation itself may be a little bit problematic because every health system is different, right? And there is what we call international reference pricing, and South Africa is actually referenced by some countries in the Middle East as well as in India. And therefore, while pharmaceutical companies and suppliers would like to take into consideration the specific context in South Africa, the complexity around the referencing in the other countries makes it a little bit more problematic. And therefore, I think there needs to be policy dialogues around more flexibility in the pricing arrangements to allow for more flexible pricing and confidential pricing. So that's something that needs to, but you guys are here in Africa, South Africa, so that's my 2 cents worth. I think that kind of policy discussions need to happen.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting one. I don't want to steal my thunder from my presentation in the afternoon, but these are some of the issues, right? It's not entirely impossible, but so there's a provision in the Medicines Act, for example, for exemptions. I think it's Section 36. So you can actually get the minister to exempt not a company, but you could say for a condition or a set of products along those lines to enable it. The trouble is, how do you convince the powers that be to actually move towards that? So that's one of the challenges with our countries. I just had a question just on a contracting point of view. What's your time horizon normally with these agreements? Well, so gene therapy, for example, it's one payment and then you measure outcomes. How long does the pharma company, because there is an element of risk, right? And those payments can be structured over a period of years. So what's the time horizon? 2 years, 2 years, 3 years?
Well, I think normally contractual agreements have varying levels of length, and typically it's between 3 to 5 years. But those are normal drugs that are used on, on a regular basis, not like cell therapy and gene therapy where they are curative. So I don't think there's a good answer to that, honestly. I think the best examples would be in hematology where it's curative. At this point in time, the assumption is yes, it actually does cure the patient because the clinical trials demonstrate that. And so the basis of the assumption is, it does that. I think some payers, and I can't, so this is a conversation that we have had. I'm not sure whether anybody executed the contract. The assumption is that the treatment is curative. If it doesn't, then is there a rebate or clawback? Right? So that is I'm not sure anybody executed this, but that's a conversation that's happening.
Yeah. I guess it's a challenge. Is there another question? While she's coming.
The follow-up question was, what challenges were experienced with regulators in different countries?
What challenges or with the regulators in the other countries? Well, so again, let me say 2 ways. I think one is that in countries where the regulators are the players, meaning the public, funders, I think looking at policy changes, at least you can have direct discussion with because the payer and funder are more or less, I mean, they're different agencies, but they're more or less have the same, overall governance, and the conversations are easier, but the change doesn't necessarily happen easier. So you can have a dialogue with the same person, but those change actually takes a little bit of time. But the UK and Italy example is a very good one, because the change into a blended or weighted average pricing actually happened only in the last 2 years. So that's one where there's a lot of consultation with the industry that enabled the change, right? I think the challenge where the payer and the funders are, the regulators and the funders are different people, like your case in South Africa, I think the challenge is a little bit greater. I don't have an answer to that.
You make the step a little bit of what we do. So we don't have the problem of one drug using multiple indications in the rare disease space, so that's actually an advantage. But how we've managed some of these things is the international pricing is a problem for every healthcare system, and our regulator is mostly involved in safety rather than pricing, which gives us safety. And rather than being involved in containing price, which is more a different section, because as you say, we are both the payers and the users of the system. So from that perspective, there's more freedom. One way to get that freedom is we use what's called, which we recently started doing, is managed access programs. So really what we do is we take the clinical trial data and say, this is the outcomes of the clinical trial, these are the 5 main measures, and we're going to put real world evidence for 5 years against these patients. There's quite a few examples, and we've had a few recently where NICE said this is not cost effective, but we've agreed for 5 years, this is what we're going to do. We ran the real world evidence, it comes back and says actually it is not cost effective, but the benefit is payable, and we will pay a reduced price than what is the international price, but that will not be in the public domain. It's unique to your healthcare system. So that is a little bit of a review how we've managed it. And the other comment I just want to make was that, as you said, I think the problem in South Africa is we need to change the regulations. We change the law. Let's make the regulations better as well. If we're all fighting for patients, let's look at the regulations as well. How can we be supportive and not prohibitive to making health better?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nichols, for your...
Dr. Hendricks, before you say, so what happens, I just want to get clarity. So there's a 5-year plan, you look at clinical trial data, and then you're going to collect real-life data. What's the payment arrangement in the meantime? So in those 5 years, and then what happens if the outcome is not matching clinical trials? There's some sort of rebate or reconciliation at the end of the 5 years?
Yeah, so a lot of this is not in the public domain, so I need to tread carefully on what I say, but I will share with you what I think will not be controversial. So really what happens is that what we agree in the 5 years is we agree actually bulk price, because the pharma company will say to us, we have to think there's 50 patients in your country, but we know as soon as the drug is approved, we're suddenly 200 because the diagnostics improved. So we say, you tell us how many patients you think there is, and they say 50. Then we say, okay, on your list price, this is a discount we would want, which is standard, and we will pay for the 50 patients. But if there's 200 patients, you don't pay more. We'll put all 200 patients on the drug for the 5 year at your cost. So you need to make sure you don't tell us differences around what's the potential patient pool. And then at the end of the 5 years, when we look at the outcome measures, we say, actually, and there's examples of both. The outcome measures is not worthwhile paying, and there's no benefit, so we stop paying. Then we need to deal, and patients are consented that at the end of this process, they will lose their treatment if there's no benefit, honestly, straightforward. However, if there is a reduced response, which again there has been in some of our conditions, there is then an agreement that you will take a discount of 20, 30, 40% on your international price going forward on our real world data, and we're happy to pay that price. So I think I'm not breaking any confidentiality, but it gives you the kind of, you need to learn to negotiate and make all parties beneficiaries rather than trying to promote one.
Thank you.
All right. I think we have the third speaker. We need to. Maybe can you just hold that?
We can talk. There's one WhatsApp question, but we can wait.
Yeah, because I'm just worried about time. So our third speaker is Dr. Catherine Malherbe, Director and the Chief Executive Officer of MedSol AI Solutions. MedSol AI, they've been doing breast screening using their solution in the primary healthcare environment. This is a South African homegrown, solution that is supposed to help for us to pick up people early, in terms of screening. We know in South Africa, many people present late with their breast cancer, challenge. And by having the solutions like the one that Katie is going to talk about, we on our way to picking people up early and hopefully with better outcomes. Over to you. Do you want me to read your bio? It's quite long, but she's a mammographer, a radiographer by trade, has worked in the industry for 20 years, Bachelor in Diagnostic Imaging, BSc, Honours in Neuroanatomy, Masters in Diagnostic Imaging, Subspecialized Mammography, completed PhD in Clinical Anatomy. I think she's best placed to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Catherine Malherbe. I'm CEO of MedSol AI Solutions, and I'm honored to stand before you today to share the innovative strides our company has made in collaboration with the A-Catalyst network of AstraZeneca. Our journey has been one of relentless dedication to improving patient care and addressing the challenges faced by healthcare systems worldwide. I'm delving into a topic that resonates deeply with our mission, value-based collaborations and how these can work in industry when coupled with groundbreaking technology and a commitment to patient-centric care. There are numerous factors which should be considered for the promotion of value-based care. New models create incentives which assist healthcare professionals to promote services for patient satisfaction and better coordination of care. Most importantly, value-based healthcare requires greater collaboration amongst the various fields of specialty associated both with patient care and treatment. At MedSol AI, we recognize a pressing need in a rural healthcare setting, the prolonged waiting periods for patient referrals, and the challenges in accurate diagnosis, particularly in cases of breast cancer. We knew that early detection and timely intervention are pivotal in improving patient outcomes. Thus, we embarked on a journey to harness the power of artificial intelligence to revolutionize the landscape of breast cancer diagnosis. We are a proudly South African company promoting the use of AI and deep machine learning at grassroots level. Our breast AI system stands as a testament to the potential of technology to transform healthcare. By leveraging machine learning, we have empowered healthcare providers in rural areas to make more informed decisions, swiftly identify patients at risk, and expedite the referral process. We developed our flagship product, Breast AI, over 4 years of research and development, with over 40,000 histologically confirmed breast cancer masses on ultrasound. We also have a second patented layer within the neural network able to predict between the two main breast cancer subtypes, namely ductal and globular carcinoma. It has an accuracy rate of 97.6% and is currently registered with SAPRA. We understand the broader implications of our work, not just in terms of the patient outcomes, but in alleviating the strain on the public healthcare system. By providing accurate risk predictions, we're significantly reducing the number of non-cancer diagnoses being sent to surgeons at public hospitals. This not only streamlines the workload for healthcare professionals, but it also mitigates the burden of limited resources. This is where the concept of value-based collaboration truly comes to life. Our collaboration with the A-Catalyst Network, Clarius wireless ultrasound probes, and local clinics and hospitals has enabled us to align incentives with outcomes. It's fostering a model where success is measured in the tangible improvements in patient care and system efficiency. Through mutual respect for each other's expertise and experience, we're providing support and defining common goals among stakeholders and leading to better coordination of care. This is the essence of innovation in pharma, not just driving innovation, but driving positive change in the lives of millions. As real-world examples, we have rolled out at 10 various public and private healthcare sites with a focus on clinical downstaging. These sites span across Soweto, Luffereng, Clayville, Atteridgeville, Pretoria West, Western Cape, and Mpumalanga. The term clinical downstaging refers to the process of screening for cancer using clinical approaches for early detection of the disease. It is distinct from screening and allows detection of breast cancer disease at a less advanced stage, in the absence of readily available screening sites in rural areas. Our most recent site to be launched was at the Chinswala District Hospital in Acornhoek. The hospital entry to our service was a long process, and the COVID era also affected our rollout plan for 2022. However, it has now allowed us to develop a dedicated breast clinic, and even during the first 2 days of training, 4 potentially malignant patients out of the 12 were able to receive on-site biopsies through the use of their surgical team. Typically, these 4 patients would have been referred to the tertiary or provincial hospitals, which span between 300 to 500 kilometers in distance. Another site that is being included is here in Cape Town, Grooteskiel Hospital, alongside Project Flamingo, and it consists of an awesome team of breast surgeons, registered nurses, patient navigators, and social workers, promoting on-site diagnosis and surgical intervention within a week. Some limitations and challenges we have are limited resources for on-site biopsies, cultural barriers around the stigma of breast cancer, and the lack of sufficient oncology centers for patients in rural regions. We are honored to have represented our country at the UN headquarters alongside Minister Nzimande and at the G20 Congress in India alongside Minister Gugubele. Through these public and private healthcare partnerships, we now have piloting to be launched in Latvia, Colombia, and we're also in early stage talks with regions such as India and Kenya. Our future includes the process of ISO certification and CE marking, with our second product, Moon AI, planned for launch end of 2024. As I stand here, reflecting on our company's journey and looking to the future, we will continue to push the boundaries of what is possible. We will embrace value-based collaborations as a catalyst for transformation, unlocking new avenues for impact. Together, we can redefine the landscape of healthcare, one patient at a time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Tew is actually going to take the questions, but I just wanted to emphasize I just wanted to emphasize that this is a local solution. And, you know, as South Africans, we have a tendency of not recognizing our own. Up until it's been recognized elsewhere, then we embrace it. So you can see they are ready to spread to the whole world, but let's make sure we support them. You know, let's use their technologies to help, you know, our ladies here in South Africa. Thank you. Doc.
Thank you. Can we just check on the WhatsApp line if there's any?
Just as a reference, I've brought the system here just to show it in tangible format. So it basically just consists of any Samsung tablet, and this is the wireless ultrasound probe. So it's a small wireless solution that's being used, has built-in Wi-Fi, so it's actually ideal for rural settings. We do struggle with connectivity in these regions. So this is how the system works. It has its own unique calling card to our system. During real-time scanning, it will give a prediction of malignancy from 0 to 100%, 100% being definitely malignant, and that's where our accuracy rate also comes in.
As somebody who comes from the Eastern Cape, which is quite under-resourced, that kind of technology will certainly help to pick up people. Because for them to get to Mthatha from the rurals, it takes about a day, and then they must move to Frere, which is another 2 hours. So it's 2 days just to be screened and diagnosed. And they go back again, and then they must come for staging. So such a technology certainly would improve, access to diagnosis.
And that's definitely why we have the poor prognosis and outcomes in our country, is because of the late diagnosis, lack of infrastructure, and it's trying to improve that whole patient referral pathway. Because we're not just working in diagnostics, we're joining hands also with the therapeutic side. And the response we've had from surgeons at our hospitals has been very welcomed, because it means there's less burden on them and that they have a more targeted approach to what's being referred to them.
Okay, the question asks, what is the cost of AI breast imaging compared to traditional mammogram?
I love when someone asks this question because I love answering it. So the typical entry-level system, the system itself, ours is a third of the price that was currently in market, and it's the same with the use of it as a service. So at the moment, where we roll out at Ujani clinics and also at local hospitals, it is offered as a free service. But at the Ujani clinics, we are now going to price it at a third of the price of what's currently being given for a breast assessment or for BC. That's why I'm excited to answer that question.
There's a question over there. Can we get a mic? Or if you're close enough, you can just walk to it.
How is it being,
Yes.
how is it being funded for the provincial departments of health paying for it, or and is there anything value-based about the payment mechanism?
So this is where the proof is in the pudding, is through our collaboration with AstraZeneca. Initially it was self-funded by ourselves to get the innovation started. And we had a few other funders, Tech Innovation Agency, SAB Foundation, and in small little sprints we developed it from a web-based version to the app that it is actually now. But currently we are joining hands with AstraZeneca, and it has opened many doors for us to be able to push it to the point where it can be rolled out globally.
Can I make a point here? So, from AstraZeneca's perspective, and part of the Pharma program is really looking at end-to-end solutions. So one of the challenges, as I discussed in my talk yesterday, is we shouldn't be just focused on the treatment itself. We need to demonstrate what we can achieve in terms of improving outcomes. And one of the challenges, as Dr. Catherine mentioned, is the late diagnosis. So what's the point of having access to the medicine if you're not diagnosing the patients early enough for curative intent? So the A-Catalyst network that Dr. Catherine referred to is really about seeding technologies to be used, right? So what we're doing is really just seeding this particular technology. And what we hope to be able to do is to get such a technology entrenched in the healthcare ecosystem, just like mammography is currently happening, just like Pap smear, right? Why shouldn't this be used? So I think for us it's really seeing this, and I hope that payers would be able to integrate them as part of the regular workflow.
I just wanted to make I guess this is an easier one. It's not a pharmaceutical product, right? So you don't have, the issues we were talking about earlier on pricing, etc. But are you able to share how you navigated public sector procurement and how you get into district health? Because I think usually it's not just about the quality of the product. In the public sector, you have to navigate. How do you get it actually to be a product that is used at a hospital and you get a reimbursement for it? And then on the private sector side as well, maybe you can just share what the challenges are in terms of broadening access.
So in in public sector, that's why it took us 4 years to roll out at the local district hospitals. It was a laborious and it was a constant discussion with all the stakeholders involved on government level, getting to the point where you could roll out. From a private sector point of view, for now it is limited. We are hoping to have it registered with medical aids. I'm looking at everyone that has medical aids. So it can actually be offered as a downscaling version for assessment of patients. And with that being said, because I'm sure someone has that question, it's not replacing mammography. That is still the point of care screening, but unfortunately in our country, very few patients are privileged enough to have access to it. Most patients at public healthcare setting present already with a lump, and ultrasound is then seen as the first choice of imaging.
I think that answers my question. I heard mammography being spoken about there. So this is not a screening tool for a woman who wants to come for screening.
No.
It's a woman who has a tender breast, or lump, or firmness, or concern.
Yes.
And it's then to predict the level of malignancy, if any.
Yes, exactly that. And at public or rural point of care imaging, the majority of patients present already with a lump.
So the value-based reimbursement then could be linked to the accuracy of the prediction.
Yes.
If it was to proceed. So it has potential for a value-based reimbursement system.
Yes.
Yes, it's probably not brought into funding as yet.
No. For now, we are piloting it at the various areas, looking at our response. So our first site completed its piloting, Dunswood Polyclinic. In the 6 months, we were able to educate and assess over 3,000 patients. Interestingly enough, only 5% of those patients ended up being referred, which gives you an example of how all 3,000 would have been referred for screening, but only a small percentage of them actually ended up requiring surgical intervention and further imaging. So that's how you're making a reduction on that strain on the public healthcare setting.
Okay. The next question is, at what point do they do the people who use the service pay? Do they pay after they've been seen? Like, do they pay on site?
At the moment, they are not paying for the service. So it is offered as a screening service, and that's where the cultural stigma around breast cancer comes. I've learned this, I hang out in Soweto over weekends, is that there's a big cultural barrier around screening for any disease. Why should I come if there's nothing wrong? So it's very difficult to offer it as a paid service for assessment. So for the patients that are being referred into the hospitals, the first time they will actually be promoted payment is literally when they're registering a file at the hospital and going for imaging.
And then the next one is, alongside your pilot studies, are you conducting early economic evaluation studies to build evidence for regulatory market entry purposes?
We are, and that's going to come along with the ISO and the CE marking, which will keep us busy for a while. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, 2 more. What codes can be used by funders when bidding for this product?
I'd love to know from you. I'm looking for a
Nothing.
And then the last one says, rare disease is becoming increasingly common in South Africa. And what is your view and plans in terms of expediting managing care for rare disease?
For overall rare diseases.
Maybe that's for us in the panel. Well, if I can get a crack at the discussion, I think rare diseases, as the term implies, rare. The cost of the therapy tends to be very high, but the overall budget impact tends to be lower. And what many health system does is that you ring-fence a particular funding for rare disease, right? So that they are able to do that. Yesterday evening during the gala dinner, I was talking to Dr. Kagago. There is a project ongoing regarding how to creatively fund for rare disease. I don't know whether that's confidential or not, so I better not divulge too much detail other than saying that I understand that Board of Healthcare Funders is working on a project on rare diseases.
think in the public sector there's not much happening. Access is concentrated around the academic centers. In the private sector, the challenge is there's no uniform approach, and there was a talk yesterday, I think the day before, about risk equalization. So if a fund has a concentration of patients, a higher a proportion of patients with rare diseases, they're at higher risk. So, and the ones that have disclosed publicly their numbers, it's an impact. I think it's a small population, but the cost of treatment is equivalent to about 0.25% to somewhere close to 0.5% of contributions. So, in additional contributions. So it's a real challenge, because then the question is, how do you explain spending that much on a group of people? It might be 20 patients sometimes. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. I guess, our earlier discussion actually talks to it. I wanted to get to, just going back to the question around data. And I think everyone sitting in the room is kind of thinking about how do you get, because when you do these initiatives, you have to get real-life data. Our public sector, it's a real struggle, so data is not, I think with your intervention, you're getting the data, it's kind of stored, you have your own kind of hub. You're not relying on the public service clinics to do that for you, so I guess it solves that problem. But when it's pharmaceutical products, getting the treating doctors, treating nurses to actually collect the data, and that's almost impossible. I think even in the private sector, you've had instances where some schemes are actually willing to pay for doctors to collect the data. And even an uptake is like 20-30%, on that basis. So how do you, other than just having transactional data from claims, how do we bridge that gap? And what have you learned, for example, some of the Asian countries and maybe Brazil, South America?
Well, I think it's early days, but what is happening is that technology or AI can actually help. So for example, we're actually partnering with a number of AI companies that are able to use unstructured. So first and foremost, you need to have a basic electronic medical record, right? So EMRs have to exist, right? And once the EMR exists, then so natural language processing is able to then extract and create structured data from unstructured data, right? And once you are able to do that, then that's a basis of a lot of real-world evidence can be generated. So, the more advanced AI is actually able to even use, multimodal data. So not just text, but also imaging, pathology, and so on. Right? So that's able to use. What are the use cases for this data? It's actually quite fascinating, because I spoke to a UK company called Cliniting, and what they have been able to do is to use unstructured data, but apply their AI to pick up patients, retrospectively patients above 40 years of age having a chest x-ray, to pick up those patients that are of higher risk, and they're actually presenting their data in ASCO this year. Right? So that's one specific use case. Another use case is, for example, what we talk about payer data, right? To talk about, well, what is the real world efficacy and safety of a particular intervention, right? So again, that could be a potential one. Maybe just one last one is, multidisciplinary teams, MDTs. So one of the problems in many MDTs is that they have, 20 cases to discuss in 60 minutes, and so, the first few cases, they have a lot of time, and then they rush through or drop off the last few cases. Maybe those are the more important ones. So AI is able to then help you prioritize the cases to talk about the most important cases up front. Right? So these are the few cases, use cases that are being explored and implemented around the world.
Thank you.
All right, so we're getting closer to the end. I'm not sure if Dr. Rosario is still with us. Is she still with us?
Yes.
Yes,
I'm still here.
Your closing remarks, as we are wrapping up the session, and then that will be followed by Mr. Tiwe, your closing remarks, and lastly, Catherine, your closing remarks, then we'll wrap it up. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Rosario.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. We can hear you now.
Thank you so much. So I think, thank you for giving me the opportunity of being part of this discussion. I think it becomes very clear how we can together continue to advance the outcomes for patients. I think we've discussed how innovation, how science drives and lays the pathway to this innovation, but how it's important to ensure that this innovation reaches the patients, and how it is important that we tackle all the aspects of this patient journey. So thank you so much for allowing me to be part of the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just following up on Dr. Rosario's comments is that, at the end of the day, an innovation is, exciting, but it only helps if the innovation, is accessible to the patients, right? And I'm very happy to be talking, to a group of funders, and because your role is absolutely critical, and we look forward to collaborating to see how we can bring innovative medicines to patients around the world.
Well, the key message I took from your presentation is that I think there needs to be some dynamism in the regulatory environment, because we could be paying a lot for the medicines because we are not taking advantage, of these newer ways of contracting. But I'm sure, Ruth, that's your big job to lobby and make sure that the regulators can, relook some of these things. Kathy, your closing remarks.
Just to say thank you for allowing me to share our innovation and the passion that we have for what we do, and watch this space. Looking forward to growing further.
Let's engage before the world takes her. All right? Let's make sure. All right. My colleague, I didn't even introduce you at the beginning. But anyway, he's the head of Insight Health Solutions, an independent consulting unit comprising specialist clinical team with expertise in the area of healthcare strategy, policy, regulation, health economics, healthcare pathways, reimbursement modules, clinical risk management, clinical coding. So there's so much. Thank you, Doc, for assisting. I know you'll be presenting later. Yeah, but thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who joined in. I hope this kind of conversation is not ending now. We are going to take these things once. We're also very big, when people are about gatherings in South Africa, we talk, but we need to move from talk to execution, so that next time when we meet, there's actually movement from where we are. Thank you very much. And then obviously the sponsors, they need to get their value, so can you please, I know the sponsor, Universal Healthcare, is not here, but please, we play this one? We play Pakamisa, okay. This one.
A world where healthcare disparities persist, it shines a beacon of hope. Welcome to the Pakamisa Initiative by AstraZeneca, where the patients are at the heart of our mission.
Yes. And we were ignored in terms of NCDs. But you see that because the importance of high from literacy, awareness perspective, that the volcano is started. Yes.
For over a decade, Pakamisa has been the cornerstone of healthcare access in South Africa. It's not just a plan, it's a commitment to awareness, early detection, and treatment support for those battling non-communicable diseases.
They basically ensure that members are well treated and well